being filed by Randy Weingarten. This is the person who said that she'll only care about students once they start paying union dues. Does she have any standing suing the administration?
Well, I've not had any conversation yet with Randy Weingarten. I know about last week, about a week ago, her comment was the president wanted to take education away from children, which clearly is not the case. He wants to improve education for children. He wants to get those dollars, even more dollars, back to the states without the bureaucracy of Washington. So that's our plan. That's our goal. I'd be glad to meet with her and talk to her about that.
Madam Secretary, can you talk about what will happen to some of the employees who are part of the DOE as you kind of shrink the department, ultimately looking to close the department? What will happen to these employees? Have you discussed, what the next plan will be for all of these employees?
Well, thank you so much for asking that, because last week we had we did terminate almost half of the Department of Education. We did it thoughtfully. We looked to see where duplication was in the departments. We wanted to make sure that we were just cutting fat from the bureaucracy, the inward-facing things, not the outward-facing servicing that we do to students and to states. So we did it very carefully. We wanted to make sure that we complied by the law. But they had, those that were terminated will get 3 months of full pay and benefits, and after that, under the rules of civil service, they also will get severance package, which is much more generous than it would be in the private sector. And then also there's accrued sick leave and unused leave that they will also get paid for. So, you'd like to provide as soft an off-ramp as you can, because after all, it's not easy, and I've done it in the private sector too. It's really not easy to terminate people.
Secretary, President Donald Trump wants to send education back to the states. Education originally, it begins in the home with the nuclear family, and the nuclear family in this country has been decimated. We got a fatherless crisis going on in this country. Far too many kids are growing up without a father, and all the statistics show that kids that grow up with a father in the home do far better in education. So I think if we can strengthen our nuclear families again in this country, that would really help the Department of Education or the education in this country.
Well, unfortunately, I can't do anything about reestablishing the nuclear family. I would hope that we would see more of that happen, because statistics really do support exactly what you've said. Nuclear families are key, and when you have parental involvement in children's education and how they're growing up, we see those results. And a lot of charter schools around the country actually invite parents to come in, and some of them actually require parents to sign a contract that they're going to support their students when they get home. So the more parent involvement we can have, the better it is for children for many of the things that they're doing, not just education.
I just spoke with one of the governors who was at the signing of the executive order, and he said he would like to see the money that's coming into the states from the DOA just come in with no strings attached. How do you view such a request?
Well, first of all, you said the DOE. That could be interpreted to be the Department of Energy.
Pardon me.
So we're the Department of Education. And I think always governors would always like to see funding without any strings attached. But that is the goal of the president, too, is to have as few strings and regulation as possible. Right now, for about every dollar of funding that goes into the states, one statistic that's shared with me is that 47 cents is spent in regulatory compliance. The president would clearly like to see that money being used to educate our students, and that's the goal.
Thank you. Thank you, Secretary. What would you like to do next?
All right, Secretary of Education there, Linda McMahon. Well, let's talk about all of this news even further there with our friend at Market Watch, Jillian Berman. She's the author of Sunk Cost: Who's to Blame for the Nation's Broken Student Loan System and How to Fix It. She joins me. Jillian, good to see you here. I know you've been following all of this extremely closely. If you're Linda McMahon and you got to go to work tomorrow morning at the Department of Education, of which you were Senate confirmed to lead, and now you have to oversee its dismantling here, what's your message to the rank and file? What do you say tomorrow morning when you have to go into headquarters?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's going to be tough, right? These are, in a lot of cases, people who came to the department to kind of to serve its mission. But already as Secretary McMahon mentioned, in the clip we saw previously, the staff has been cut significantly. So, she's kind of already messaged that this is what they're trying to do, that, that they're part of a final mission, if you will. And so, I assume that she'll probably continue with that rhetoric as well.
I want to talk about the line that has been, proffered for months, and especially was today, coming from the president, that education needs to be left up to the states. What does he mean by that? And if that's the case, if he believes that, why did we have a federal department solely focused on education? It was created back in the Carter administration, back in 1979, so it's a relatively new federal agency here. So what was its main purpose?
Yeah. So, I think the returning education back to the states has really been sort of a rallying cry, right, of this movement over decades, even, basically since the department was founded, to get rid of it. And, what it means is that I think a lot of parents and families want the people who are making decisions about their children's education to be as close to the children as possible. The reality is most of those decisions do actually, at least in the K through 12 context, do, rest with local schools and with states. The Department of Education, or the federal government, is only responsible for about 10% of funding that goes to K through 12 schools. So, when you think about why they originally established the department and the goal there, it was kind of to help facilitate getting that money out the door to states and schools, and to implement goals set by Congress around what that money was supposed to do.
Jillian, to your point, federal agencies largely are funding vehicles to trickle down to, state and local jurisdictions here. Let's talk about something you know a lot about here. The Education Department is one of the main funding vehicles for the allocation, facilitation, disbursement of student loans. If there's no more Department of Education, who takes over that authority?
That's a good question. So, there have been some different ideas floated. I think the one that comes up most often is that you kind of transfer the function of student loan disbursement and servicing to the Treasury Department. We'd had President Trump a couple weeks ago mention maybe sending that function to SBA or the Commerce Department. But probably what would happen, right, is they would try to move it to a different agency. In terms of whether Congress would allow that, that's a statutorily mandated function of the Department of Education, which, all the leadership has said they're going to keep doing the statutorily mandated functions until they can, sort of eliminate it through Congress. Whether they can get that through is another question. But I think logistically, it would probably move to something like the Treasury Department.
I want to talk kind of in the near term, but in the future, and I know that's difficult, because there has been some hedging going on in the official statements, even from White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt today, acknowledging that this means the agency itself will look different, yes, smaller, not necessarily completely vacant and absent here. And then you see the language in the executive order itself calling for the elimination, whole cloth, carte blanche of the department here. So there does seem to be some hedging going on with the language specifically. In 4 years' time, after President Trump is done in office, will we still have, do you think, a shell of an education department in some capacity?
That's a good question. Of course, like you said, it's hard to predict the future. I think, we had an acknowledgement from sort of those statements from the White House press secretary, and also even from President Trump at the signing of the executive order, that to totally dismantle the agency, you will need to go before Congress. And it's going to require some Democrats to sign on. So it's difficult to imagine that would happen and that Democrats would sign on to dismantling the agency. But already with the staff cuts, advocates for students and student loan borrowers, have sort of already expressed concern that some of the functions that originally were, part of the department aren't getting done, or they don't have the staff to do that. So I think we already do see, a shell of the old department, and yeah, maybe in 4 years it'll be even smaller.
Let's kind of go out into, states and cities and school districts and get a pulse of what are they saying? Governors of states, superintendents of major school districts here. We know what the teachers' unions are saying. They're not happy about this at all. Democratic members of Congress and the Senate, they're not happy about this at all. How is it faring out there?
Yeah, so I haven't spoken since the announcement, right, to to sort of to people in schools and in the communities. But I imagine you'd get probably a mixed review, right? Obviously, the sort of push to dismantle the agency, that's been going for a long time and has been a rallying cry of certain student and parent communities. We saw Secretary McMahon mention governors. Some governors I think would like to have more control over this funding, so I think they're happy about it. I think on the other hand, you see, sort of advocates for low-income students or, for students with disabilities who are a little bit worried about, what happens when the agency that oversees, sort of basic compliance with certain laws is diminished. So I think it's definitely a mixed bag.
All right, Julian Berman, always appreciate your insight, your reporting, your time here, and we'll definitely talk soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, in the meantime here, I just want to kind of throw up for you on our screen some of the reactions coming in on social media, especially from those who were in attendance today at the signing of the executive order, including many of these Republican state governors, like Ohio Governor Mike DeWine, also Texas Governor Greg Abbott here. DeWine saying this, take a look at this statement. He's saying, "Today, I joined President Trump and several fellow governors at the White House in support of the president's proposal to return education back to the states, saying every student, family, and community is different. In Ohio, we've achieved great results by focusing on our administration's priorities like improving literacy achievement, ensuring all students have pathways to thrive in our workforce, and more." He says now it's time to take the next step. Governor Greg Abbott as well of Texas posting this photo on social media, joined with so many others there in Washington today, saying at the White House right now, headed to see President Trump return control of education back to the states where it belongs. I want to put this up, live picture there at the U.S. Capitol. Remember, I've been asking so many of our experts, well, what is Congress's role here? You know what some of these Democratic members of Congress, including former Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, think of it. She says Trump, Musk, and the GOP are gutting the Department of Education, axing teachers' jobs, slashing support for students with disabilities, and pushing college out of reach, all to bankroll billionaire tax cuts. She says America's future is not for sale. Our kids deserve better. But there is some legislation percolating there in the halls of Congress, introduced by Senator from Louisiana, the Republican Bill Cassidy, trying to enshrine and codify this into law. Lillian Juarez, reporter there on Capitol Hill, notes Cassidy says he will introduce legislation to get rid of the Education Department following Trump's EO, saying since the department can only be shut down with congressional approval, I will support the president's goals by submitting legislation to accomplish this, as follows, and goes on from there. So it does seem like some of these congressional efforts are afoot because there is, like I said, and you've heard, there is some role here for Congress, a big one at that. Senator Cassidy saying, I agree with President Trump that the Department of Education has failed its mission. Since the department can only be shut down with congressional approval, I will support the president's goals by submitting legislation to accomplish this as soon as possible.